For those of you who like to take notes during presentations, let me foreshadow a bit because I'd like to cover the 5 C's of campaigns. And for me this evening, that's going to be C number 1 is confessions, then context, common ground, commitment, and courage. Let's start with confessions, and confession number 1. You just heard it alluded to. I love Canada. Every time I come here, you spoil me. I haven't been to Vancouver 56 times. What I said was 5 or 6 times.
I like 56 better.
But here's the good news.
I guess we have to have you back.
I've been here 5 or 6 times. I have never had it rain while I've been here, including flying in last night, staying all day today, and hopefully that weather will hold through the morning. So you have spoiled me. I like to think that I brought the sun to you. Second, we honeymooned here. My wife and I honeymooned here about 12 years ago. We ride our bikes from Banff to Jasper on the Great Highway, and it was an amazing start to a wonderful marriage. Third, my wife's business co-founder is from here in Canada, and their company is actually called Canyon Snow. My wife is from Topeka Canyon and Topanga Canyon in LA, and her partner is from Sudbury, where there's lots of snow. So together they are Canyon Snow. And fourth, Canadians, as you may know, have taken over California. California is 38 million people, 500,000 plus Canadian citizens, more than 250,000 in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area alone. You are taking over my state. Confession number 2, I am a public policy geek. In a valley known internationally for computer scientists, I am a political scientist, which, by the way, is the only true science, but allows us, hopefully, to build a better region. And as a public policy professional, my area of expertise is transportation, housing, and land use, what I like to call place making. And my intent is not just to build anywhere and everywhere when we conduct our work. Our interest is in building better communities. And if communities were living organisms, then our transportation systems would be the skeleton of that organism. What we build around that skeleton, the flesh and the veins and everything else, that's the housing and land use and what we're able to do because of that strong skeleton that we have built to shape a livable, viable community, hopefully for all of us, whether that's Silicon Valley or the Vancouver region. So what can we do with that skeleton? And I'm glad that your February 2nd speaker is going to come and speak with you about affordable homes. So let me delve into that for a moment as we talk about why transportation is so important. And let me share a little bit about what we've done around this skeleton that we're building and have built through a better transportation system. So let me ask a question. How many of you are urban planners? Several, and you all admit it. That's the first chance to healing. That is great to have so many urban planners here in the room. What have we tried to do with that? First, we have the most innovative housing trust fund in the United States. There are about 450 housing trusts throughout the United States. Ours is the only one to date out of 450 in our 50 states that is completely funded through voluntary contributions. It celebrates its 15th anniversary this April, and we are about to help our 20,000th family in high-cost Silicon Valley secure an affordable home in which to live. The goal started out fairly unambitious. We only wanted to raise $20 million for that housing trust. And the cynics in our community, if you're familiar at all with Silicon Valley, said that sounds like 2 homes in Los Altos Hills. But we had a leveraging model that if we took $20 million, we felt we could leverage $200 million in private development And with that money, we could initially assist about 4,800 families secure a home in high-cost Silicon Valley, equally divided into 3 parts. A third for those who were homeless or at risk of becoming so. A third for affordable rental housing, and a third for first-time home buyers. That was the goal. We gave ourselves 2 years to accomplish that goal. This was in the year 1999. Then something funny happened in 2001. Near the end of those 2 years, that was one of the steepest economic recessions in the history of Silicon Valley. Yet on August 31 of 2001, we were able to stand forward because we had met that goal. We had raised $20 million, but we weren't right on the outcome. 20 million didn't leverage 200 million, didn't help 4,800 families. It turns out that to date, 20 million has actually leveraged 69 million in private contributions. 69 million has leveraged 1.9 billion in private development, and we've helped, as I've mentioned, within the next month, 20,000 individuals and families to afford to live in a very high-cost region on the planet. Why can we do those affordable homes in so many places? We have the skeleton, we have the transportation system. Second, it has allowed us to advocate for more affordable homes. How many of you have ever gone to a city or town council meeting and actually stood in front of the mic advocating for affordable housing? Anyone here? About 8 of us. Wasn't it fun? I remember one of the first times I did that. I went out to a city on a cold January night, cold by California standards, by the way, cold January night in a city that I won't name because I don't like to embarrass anyone, San Jose. And I stepped into that room. There were about 200 people in that audience, all with buttons and signs, against this particular affordable rental home development. It was right near a light rail line from a past measure that we had led to build so that we could have more density around that transit station. There were 35 people already in line, speaker cards clutched in hand, every single one opposed to that particular affordable rental home development. I was the 36th and lone speaker in support. And as I stood there in that very long, very loud, increasingly angry line, I will admit my knees were kind of knocking together and I had that just little bit of trickle of sweat running down the side of my face and down my back. And I kept repeating that old civil rights quote to myself. One man armed with the truth is a majority. One man armed with the truth is a majority. But another line kept coming in my head and it went something like this. Yeah, but one of these neighbors armed with a gun and you're dead. Well, not because of anything brilliant I had to say that night. Believe me, I wasn't. That city council held firm. And on an 11-0 vote, they passed and approved 198 beautiful, affordable rental homes. And it was about 3 years later when I was invited with the mayor of San Jose to join her to be the keynote speaker as they opened up those 198 homes with 198 families and individuals standing there ready, willing, and eager to occupy them. And the 2 gentlemen, and they truly were, the 2 gentlemen who had led all that opposition on a cold January night to come out and oppose it, they had the decency to be there. And as I came off that podium that day, they kind of nervously ushered me over, and I even more nervously approached them. And they said, Carl, if we had had any idea that these are what are called affordable housing, and that these are the types of family that need affordable housing, we wouldn't have been opposing you that night. We have an incredible responsibility to keep our own ears open and hopefully in an informed and thoughtful and civil way to open the ears of others. Because we were able to do that development because of the skeleton, the rail transit system that an earlier measure had built, so that we would have that opportunity for folks of all income levels to enjoy and prosper there. Housing advocacy. Was it just one time? We've advocated for over 250 affordable home developments throughout Silicon Valley. We've won every time but 12 times. by bringing unlikely allies together for the common good in our own areas of why that's important to us. Linking business and labor, faith and environment, neighborhoods and others, coming together with the common ground that a coalition can provide and advance our community. We've been able to build bike lanes throughout Silicon Valley, a work in progress, and pass an open space measure so that as we grow up rather than out, we're also protecting parklands, hillsides, and open space for generations to come. So when I say transportation is a skeleton upon which we can build a better community, those aren't empty words. It's part of an overall strategy of making Silicon Valley and the greater Vancouver region a better, more livable place. Moving on to the next C is context. Let me provide quickly a history of the organization that I'm so proud to lead. The Silicon Valley Leadership Group was actually created by an icon of the innovation economy named David Packard, the co-founder of Hewlett-Packard. Does anybody know how Hewlett-Packard got its start? In a garage in Palo Alto, California, where Bill Hewlett slept in a shed in the backyard, which was no more than a wooden structure with a cot for a bed. David Packard and his young wife, Lucille, lived in the house, and their office was their garage. Their first invention, Fantasia fans, was the audio oscillator, which they sold to the Walt Disney Company, about 13 of them. And they got their start, and they built a company that today has 300,000 employees and well over 150 billion in annual revenue. They were visionaries in business. They were visionaries in building community. 38 years ago, David Packard pulled together a group of CEOs and said, we are fierce competitors in the marketplace. But when it comes to this community, we all have something at stake. The economic vitality and the quality of life for our workers, their families, and everyone else who calls this region home. And he created something that today is called the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, that now consists of about 390 private sector employers, primarily from the innovation economy, from scrappy startups to iconic brands, all told about $6 trillion in annual revenue. But their common ground about being interested in participating in the leadership group as global CEOs who are incredibly busy is making our region a better place. I've had the pleasure of being CEO of the organization now going on my 19th year. During that time, the organization has had a chance to lead 5 successful transportation funding measures, of which I've personally led 4 of those 5. All told, $12 billion plus in local revenue generated for those improvements. And in our country, when you have local funds, you act like a magnet for matching regional, state, and federal funds. That amount is nearly $4 billion more, which we would have otherwise never have received to leverage our limited dollars. 1984 was the start. We did what you are attempting to do, to be the first. We like doing that in Silicon Valley. You like doing that in Vancouver. When you're the first, people wonder with skepticism, will it work? And they ask hard yet important questions about whether it will work. Well, for us it did. As private citizens with our public sector partners, we led a campaign for a 10-year half-cent sales tax. Half-cent sales tax. Does that sound familiar? For specific transportation improvements. Sound familiar? That had accountability through annual audits. Sound familiar? Very similar in structure. We were able to win that campaign with 56% of the vote, generating $1.4 billion in local funds, another few hundred million in regional and state funds, and we finished all the improvements on time and on budget, except for the ones that we finished under budget and under time. Promises made, promises kept. That allowed us to go back to our voters in 1992 successfully again in 1996 for a $1.4 billion measure, 2000 for a $6.5 billion revenue measure, and 2008 for another $3.5 billion measure. All of our measures that have sunsetted have delivered every single improvement promised through the accountability mechanisms that we put in, that you've put in your measure, to keep faith with our fellow taxpayers and private citizens and our public sector partners. The third C, common ground. I mentioned some of the common ground that we've had from our experience over 3 decades of these campaigns and that you're putting together here in Vancouver. First, that 1984 measure, a first of its kind. I mentioned the accountability, along with the annual audits, separating the funds. We have lots of transportation revenue sources in Santa Clara County, Silicon Valley, our region, California, and the United States. The dollars raised through our dedicated sales tax were separated. Annual audits, watchdog committee, governance structure to make sure that that was the only purpose for those funds, with accountability demanded by a watchdog media as well as citizens, you and I, and it worked. Second, specifics. It's not we're going to do something maybe somewhere. These are the list of improvements. The 1996 campaign that I had the pleasure of leading looks a lot like yours. It had road improvements and rail transit improvements. It had express bus improvements and bus improvements. It had bicycle improvements. It had pedestrian improvements. Sound familiar? 19 projects to be delivered and funded through a 9-year sales tax. All 19 were delivered on time and on budget. Voters deserve and expect specifics with our hard-earned tax dollars. That's what we provide, that's what you're trying to provide, and we have that common ground. Balance, a plan that meets all of our transportation choices, so that those who still want to drive their single-occupant cars can, those who want to commute together can and do it a little easier, those who can use transit sometimes to all the time have that choice. Those who have a car and choose transit on occasion, that's one less brake light in front of the person behind them. And then bike and ped and active transportation too. The fourth similarity that I've really enjoyed today, and you've kept me working today. This is my 4th presentation, each one completely different from the last because I get bored hearing myself speak, and you may already be bored hearing me speak. But 4th presentation and several one-on-one media interviews is how impressed I am with the broad-based coalition that you're already building of business of all type, small and large, across industry clusters, labor, public and private, environmentalists, faith community, neighborhood leaders. That's what these coalitions should be. And there will be opposition. That's okay. That's good for a democracy. It's better informed debate when people are civil and civic in their approach. You have that. And then finally, the private sector leaders that I've met with today impress me. They're serious, and we share something in common. I hate taxes. I hate traffic more. There's a trade-off that we all make in a democracy, isn't there? And I would rather wisely invest in my future, knowing it's a better future for everyone when I have the opportunity to do so. I mentioned that you're visionaries in Vancouver because you're trying something that's never been done in Canada, just as ours had never been done in California or anywhere else in the United States. A specific, dedicated funding measure for specific transportation improvements through a sales tax. Well, we were the first in 1984, And because we kept our word, that left us open the possibility to go back to our voters, private citizen to private citizen, to trust us again. That's why we were able to pass that $1.4 billion 1996 measure, and that $6.5 billion year 2000 measure, and the $3.5 billion 2008 measure. Because you build that trust when you keep your word. Not only were we able to build the first measure, the first renewal of a measure, the first renewal of a renewal, and the first renewal of a renewal of a renewal in our valley. But California's 58 counties have now had 20 more of those counties follow suit, representing 80%, 8 of 10 of all Californians, with their own transportation sales tax measures. And the history of promises made and promises kept in every county in our state is phenomenal. Those measures now count for 50 cents of every dollar invested in transportation in the Golden State. Local control of local funds with local accountability is what you offer as a region and what we've delivered as a region. The fourth C is commitment. And this is your choice. We're stuck in traffic, we're angry, we're stalled, we don't have enough transit that works, the bike lanes don't feel as safe as they should. We can sit back and be enraged, or we can step forward and be engaged. The commitment is your choice. I figure if you've come out on a beautiful night here in January to hear some guy you've never heard of before, you're probably fairly engaged. So now you have a choice. You're 55 days and a wake-up call from your mail-in ballot period beginning. And then you have a 75-day period in which to speak with your neighbors, friends, co-workers, and others about joining you in supporting building for a better Vancouver future. From what I've read, you're expecting 1 million more people here to add to the 2.4 million people currently in your region in just 25 years. You will be adding 600,000 weekday trips on an already clogged and congested set of transportation systems. So the choice you have is plan for it, invest and prosper, or roll the dice and just see what it becomes over the next 25 years. Our founder I mentioned was David Packard. I had the pleasure of working for him while I was at HP a lifetime ago. When he formed our organization, he told this to his fellow board members. Our job as CEOs is not to sit on the sidelines and either cheer or jeer. Our job is to get into the game and move the ball forward. It was active democracy. It was direct democracy. It was citizen engagement, even at the CEO level, in the communities in which they, their employees, and families lived. So how do you commit and how do you engage? How many of you are students here today? Cool. About 30 students. One of the most effective things we've done on the 4 measures on transportation that I've had the pleasure of leading is a very active college campaign where all of our universities and colleges had both volunteers and, I will have to say, poorly compensated team leaders to spread the word peer-to-peer, being at every garage, every transit stop that fed into every university and college, so that at every peak time, students speaking with students, passing out literature as to why you think this is important to your future here in the Vancouver region. It matters when people hear from peers, people who look and sound, dress, and act like them. College students, there's a tremendous role that you can play. How many business owners are here this evening? A couple, thank you, kindred spirits. Our organization is 390 companies of all sizes, mainly innovation economy, but across industry clusters. When we run our campaigns, well over 100 of those companies will run in-house employee information campaigns. Not telling employees how to vote. Engineers in Silicon Valley are too smart to be told what to do, and they resent it. But explaining why the CEO or the company is personally involved, providing the pros and the cons in a thoughtful way, encouraging people to vote what they think is best. It makes a difference when you inform smart people about their decisions. And when I read in the Vancouver Sun flying in that only 30% are even aware today of a very smart and informed electorate, that this is even being considered, you have an amazing opportunity to help in a non-cost way to inform employees and colleagues. That's your time. Another way that you can all help is treasure. Every campaign that we've done has had a finance committee. I remember the 1996 campaign vividly. I was still at Hewlett-Packard Company. The CEO was a wonderful gentleman, now passed away, named Lou Platt. Lou called me into his office to let me know that if it was okay with me, he wanted to loan me out to run that campaign for the Silicon Valley Leadership Group for 6 months. We're nothing if not specific, tracking my hours, worked an average of 102 hours a week for 6 months, 7 days a week. Fortunately, successfully. My one request of Lou Platt, if I will run this campaign, I need you to be the fundraising chair. It was a $1.6 million goal. He said yes, and he offered to personally raise $800,000 of the $1.6 million. He didn't. He raised $850,000. But that finance committee of people interested from throughout our community, from business leaders of all kinds to labor to environmentalists to the faith community, all pledged within their means. And it was whether it was a Lou Platt pledging to raise $800,000 and exceeding the goal, or our environmental community pledging to raise $10,000 and exceeding the goal. We all stepped forward. So how can you help? There's time, there's treasure, and then there's talent. It's amazing all that needs to be done in a successful campaign. 55 days will be here in a blink. 75 days will pass quickly for your voting period. And then on May 29, or whenever the votes are tabulated, you're either going to celebrate or not. And it's going to depend on your hard work over that time period. Which brings me to the fifth and final C, courage. A campaign is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And if you have a 75-day voting period, ours are 30 days for mail-in ballots in California. You have supersized it 2.5 times. You're not running a marathon, you're running an Ironman. One of my trips to Vancouver was a launching point for the 2011 Ironman Canada. And I remember well training for that race and then competing in Penticton, where it used to be held. And when you're out there for a very long day, swimming 2.4 miles, cycling 112 miles, and then running your 26.2-mile marathon, you have to keep the goal in mind. And it takes courage to keep focused. I mentioned when I run campaigns, it averages, the last one was 99 hours a week. I got lazy and didn't do the 102 hours a week. It felt like that Ironman felt. You keep the goal in sight. You stay focused but flexible for whatever you're going to endure along the course, and you finish the race. Why is that? Because what's at stake? Let me conclude. Why did I give up my Sunday away from my wife and my 2 adorable little girls to travel up here, and then give up today Monday is a national holiday in the United States that a lot of us hold very, very dear. That's Martin Luther King Day, who committed his own life to service, and it cost him his life. So why did I spend yesterday and today coming here? In a word, respect. I have immense respect that you're here this evening, that hopefully you care enough to be working on this, or care enough to at least learn more about it, or even be concerned about it. That's what democracy's about. But I respect private and public citizens who want to build a better region for themselves and their children. You know, I've had the pleasure of leading or co-leading 10 ballot initiative campaigns. I've been fortunate. I've won 9 out of 10. I should say we've won 9 out of 10. They're always a group effort. I'm often asked, what did you learn from the one you lost? Listen really carefully. This was the main takeaway that I learned. I hate losing. Because you worked just as hard on the one you lost than the 9 you won. And yes, there were lessons learned. But you're going to work really hard over the next 55 days and the 75 days to follow. Go out and win this campaign. Build a better Vancouver region. Then invite me back. Thank you. Now, I have a young friend in the audience. Is Charlotte still here? Charlotte, will you stand up? Charlotte's 9 years old. And when we talk about the future of the Vancouver region, Charlotte came out at 9 years old to listen to me. I tell you, my 10-year-old and 5-year-old daughters would have left a long time ago. But when a lot of these projects are done, Charlotte will be, the buses will come online when Charlotte's about 11 or 12. Some of the light rail will start being online when Charlotte's about 14 or 15 or 16. The bridge will be done when Charlotte's about 19. You're building for your future. It takes time. Rome wasn't built in a day. Silicon Valley and Vancouver won't have their transportation systems rebuilt the next day either. We're in it for the long haul, aren't we? That's why we're citizens here. Charlotte, thank you. I owe you one. With that, I'm happy to engage in a conversation.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I do different independent media radio stations.
Hi, Kelly.
I have just one question. I'm a transit rider. I ride transit all the time, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. You say about we are moving forward towards the future on public transportation. My question is, why aren't we getting enough public transportation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for everybody to ride on? Great. Thank you.
And Kelly, thank you. One thing you need to know about someone who you've invited in from California is I will be as helpful and as knowledgeable as I can on what I know, and I never bluff on what I don't know. I don't know whether your transit system is 24/7. Those are questions for the people that are here, work here, and provide those services. What I do know from what I've studied, you have a pretty good mode split to be geek speak. You have 73%, just shy of that, who are single occupant drivers for their daily trips. You have 27% that are on transit with you, Kelly, in some form, or on their bikes like I do. I prefer 2 wheels over 4, or on their feet. And since the last time those mode splits were studied 4 years earlier, you've gone up and to the right. You've improved on transit ridership, bike ridership, and pedestrian use. And your single occupant vehicle trips have actually gone down. Those are steps in the right direction. That's impressive. We're spoiled. We have 330 sunny days a year in Silicon Valley with an average temperature of 72 degrees and no humidity. And we don't have a mode split nearly as successful as yours. So in many ways, when I'm here, Kelly, I'm learning from you and everyone else in this room how we can do it better in a climate that's much more conducive to getting out of our cars. So thank you for stepping forward. Yes, sir.
Hi there, my name is Corky, and I just formed a group, the opponents of greenwashed transit taxes on the unrich. It happens that I, 10 years ago, was in Arizona, Phoenix area, and they had a referendum there. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I was in the Green Party there, as I am here, and they had a referendum on transportation and transit, and the split was 85-15, if I remember correctly, the wrong way. 15% for public transit, 85% for freeways. 85% for freeways. Now, being Americans, the people down there, some of the environmentalists were saying, 15%, wow, we never had so much before in Arizona. Yeah, let's go for it. Let's vote for this. I didn't. I campaigned against it. Now here, they're being cagey. They're not even saying any percentages. And that's one of the main reasons I formed the group. Do you have any comment?
Sure. First, could you turn around for a moment? He has the best glasses in the room. Corky, thank you. From what I've read, this measure will generate about $250 million a year in sales tax revenue for improvements, of which, if the Vancouver Sun Rider was accurate, and forgive me, I'm your guest, I'm not from here, about $38 million is for road use of all types. So overwhelmingly, this is to benefit everyone with a huge emphasis on transit. But others could speak to the specifics. But thanks for standing
But no
up.
guarantees on the split.
And again, one of the main, it's a fair point, one of the main items every time we've run a measure that the opposition would say is there's no guarantees. We have kept our word every time. We have delivered all the improvements for every measure that has run its course. Is that a guarantee? That's how the money can be spent in our ballot language. That's how it was used. That's why the accountability provisions of audits and other steps and the separation of the funds were called for and adhered to. And it worked. Thank you, though, for speaking up, Corky. Why don't we switch between mics so the wonderful people back there also get a chance, and we'll just rotate. Sir, if you could state your name.
Ambassador, father of Sablefish, father of all women, Raven Tribe, Ganhada, expressing appreciation for the privilege of gathering in traditional territory. Haishka Siam Siaya. We have Aboriginal people in our coalition as well. I serve in the transit working group of the Metro Vancouver Alliance. I'm going to utilize your skeleton image, and I'm also going to visit the topic of courtesy transit. I think if one were building a body, one would begin with the skeleton and build the body around it. Sometimes people seem to say, well, show us the demand, and then maybe we'll see if we can try to serve it. So I'm wondering if you agree that your skeleton image tends to lean in the direction of build the system and build the rest of the, or put the skeleton in place and build the rest of the body around it. With regard to the notion of courtesy transit, some of the reasons why might be driving a bus would be a less difficult job. Boarding and unboarding would be simpler, and I'm not entirely convinced either way, but my question to you is whether you feel with your vast experience that conceivably a courtesy transit option could be viable.
And by courtesy transit, is that free transit? What do you mean by that term? I'm not
Well,
familiar.
some people say nothing is free, so that's why we say courtesy transit rather than quote free, unquote transit.
Sure. Okay. First, thank you for coming out tonight and for your 2 comments. On the skeleton as a transportation system analogy, what's really tough about a built environment is we can't take an Etch-a-Sketch to the whole thing. We have to start with what we have and then build to make it better. It's even harder in the region that I call home because we're a lot more sprawled than you are here. You have actually better opportunity, if you've already shown, to make transit work. So my hat's off to you in that regard. In terms of free transit, I know there are some places that do that. We don't do it in Silicon Valley because you're right, nothing is free and someone is paying to operate and maintain a system. The irony is many people who only drive cars and who don't support transit do it under the guise that it doesn't pay for itself. Well, at least in California, neither do our roads. Our roads are subsidized, so is our transit system. But our goal by folks who directly use the system, whether that's cars through the fuel they pay or bridge tolls or whatever, whether that's transit by the fees we pay, we're all contributing to operate and maintain that system that benefits all of us. And having a fare box return to help pay for that system helps us sustain that system. So we may disagree, and that's what's great about a democracy, but having some level of fare helps pay for the system that we all benefit from, whether we're the direct users or not. So thanks for coming out tonight. Sir? By the way, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone in Vancouver, so you're allowed to disagree with anything I say and still vote for your measure.
My name is Chris Sheldon, and I would like to welcome you to Vancouver and to Canada. There are some slight differences between, say, the state of California with 39 million people and Canada, which only has 33 million people. So that when you throw out your numbers relative to California and how much money you can raise in a tax, 0.5% or 5 mil rate, tax rate, you're taxing 39 people, while we're only taxing a couple million here in Vancouver.
Yeah. Chris, if I wasn't clear, forgive me, and I'm so glad you asked me to clarify, because if you misunderstood, probably dozens of others have as well.
I didn't misunderstand you, sir. I know the difference between absolute and relativity, and I know how the salesman you are, and you are a master at it, will use whatever is best for your purpose.
Well, let me explain and finish my thought as I allowed you to finish yours, Chris. Our measures have not covered 39 million Californians. Our measures have been for Santa Clara County, which is almost a comparable size of your region here. You're actually bigger. Your region is currently about 2.4 million people, and if I read it right, about 1.2 million jobs. Our region, which is called Santa Clara County, is 1.9 million people, so we're actually a smaller base of people and about 1 million jobs, so a slightly smaller base of jobs. That's where our measure has been, not all 39. So when I've talked about 5 campaigns totaling $12 billion, that is taxes paid within that 1.9 million population, not 39 million. So I hope that clarifies. Okay.
Here in Canada, we have a universal health care system, and I hope you'll learn how to do it in the United States of America.
Or just get sick while I'm visiting.
What I would also like to point out is that the city of LA had a wonderful light rail transit system until General Motors moved in and bought up one of the systems. There's 3 systems. Bought up the one in the middle and ran it into the ground, as it did in other cities throughout the United States of America, forcing people to buy cars or buy their buses. And that, you can see the urban sprawl throughout the United States of America, particularly in LA, but in other areas. Today, we have Detroit, Flint, Michigan being the home of GM production and Detroit being the home of the headquarters, where they are now destroying houses because the inner city is being destroyed by the planning of the auto industry. So I am saying, what I am saying is we in Canada have a different culture. One of that is that we want our politicians to give us value for money for the projects that they build. Economy, efficiency, and effectiveness is what it's defined as. If you point this out to TransLink, the best they can do, and I have done this, the best they could do is come up with that they are efficient and effective because they always come up with the most expensive system going that cannot pay for itself.
Chris, let me respond to your 3 points. There are so many people behind you that I want to be respectful to them.
My point is that we are, if the province of British Columbia can insist on building or replacing the Dease Tunnel with a bridge for a multi-million-dollar project, then the province of British Columbia should be paying for the light rail transit and the transit system of Vancouver. They expanded the freeway system, okay? General revenue. The question is, why are the people of Vancouver being asked to build and pay for with a temporary tax? Remember the temporary tax that was implemented in 1917 called the income tax? Why are the citizens of Vancouver, Greater Vancouver, being asked to pay for it with a regressive tax, one, when the province will build their own projects, the automobile-oriented, out of general revenue?
Great, thank you. Okay, there were a bunch of questions there, and I think I'll just cut to the last one. And that's where in a democracy you have a choice. For us, many people said, why should, in 1984 when we were the first, many people said this is the state's responsibility. This is the federal government's responsibility. And you know what? They were right. But it wasn't getting done. So we had a choice. We could pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps, control our own destiny, and do it, or we could wait decades for them not to do it. We chose to do it, and that is your choice here too. And for us it worked.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today. I would actually encourage you to get into a little bit more specifics around the campaign structure specifically. You use the word "we" a lot in terms of the Finance Committee. We've got a broad-based coalition. My name's Sharon Isaac. I've worked with several different organizations, seniors, transit, and the Metro Vancouver Alliance Transit Group as well. We've got a lot of people here trying to make this campaign active, but you use the word "we" a lot. So who ran the campaign? How did you work those sort of nuances of corralling a large group of people together to get something for the region? Secondly, how did you ensure accountability and deliverables were actually done once the campaign was over? So you said, yes, these dollars are going to go for X, Y, Z, 19 initiatives. How did you encourage or make sure the government would do that with the funds?
Great. Sharon, thank you. Great questions, and thanks for letting me know who you are. Campaign specifics. I have two thoughts on that I hope you'll appreciate. I had 3 wonderful meetings today with different groups of all spectrums of the region who are dedicated as private citizens to help pass this measure. And in the luxury of those meetings with private citizens, I was very specific about different campaign strategies and tactics. I don't watch football, but I understand there was a big game on yesterday. I bet you, Sharon, dinner on you, that the coaches of those teams did not hand their playbook to the other team. So in a group that's being webcast with, in a democracy, wonderful people here who are part of the opposition of this measure, I won't go into a lot of campaign specifics here. What I will share is that we culture that I mentioned, and that is engaging everyone on what they care about. For I've shared with you some of what I care about. We have a very active bicycling community in Silicon Valley, and when our measures include active transportation, We engage them. We have Kelly, a very active transit ridership community in Silicon Valley. We engage them. We have a business community that cares about the economic success and vibrancy of the region, because when your employees are stalled in gridlock, it's hard to recruit and retain them, and it's hard to be competitive globally. That's the message for them. We have a private sector labor community that knows that our measures are thousands of wonderfully paying jobs. We connect with them from that vantage point. We have each of those constituencies speak like-minded to their constituencies. So messengers and messages are in alignment with the recipients. I was able to go into a lot of strategies and tactics today. I hope you'll understand why I wouldn't do that here. In terms of delivery, those are the mechanisms you put into place. There's a beauty of a free press. I had a chance to do one-on-one interviews with several members, several journalists today here in Canada. Doesn't seem to me that they give people a hall pass. They seem pretty bright, educated, and what I like to call skeptical rather than cynical, in a healthy skeptic way. When you're doing annual audits, as we've done, when you're reporting to the public the project delivery schedule and the timeline, like we've done, when you are setting aside the funds completely from the other funds so that they're not commingled and they have to be used for those specific purposes, like you plan and we've done, it brings about delivery. And I stand as living proof that that has been our experience, not only in Santa Clara County, with 2 of our measures that have completely run their course. They weren't permanent, sir. They expired as promised, with all the projects completed. And the other 20 counties whose measures have also expired in California. I can't think of a single county that didn't deliver their improvements by having those accountability measures in place, but Sharon, also their credibility and their honor on the line. It helps a lot.
Yeah, we've got different political histories, obviously, so people are a little bit sort of skeptical that the money will go directed to where it's supposed to.
And that's fair, but I still have never seen a government agency north or south of our border that people just thought was great. It's keeping them
yeah, exactly.
accountable.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Sir, yes.
Yeah, first a brief comment. Well, firstly, Frank Norman. I'm a user of all different types of transit.
Good.
And bike, commuting once in a while, and driver. A brief comment, and then get to my question quickly as I can. Firstly, I think there's a little bit of a difference between the model of funding that you talked about in California, in as much as that the decision we have here to have a plebiscite for regional funding, it was not a choice that the region made. It was one that was forced on us by the province. And in the Mayor's Council, they were not in favor of having to go through this route, although personally I think that there's no alternative but to vote yes. And now to lead on to my question, I've seen a list of improvements that the extra sales tax will help fund, but nothing I've seen so far answers a question your story raises, and that is, will there be any term on the sales tax? Will we have another measure further down the road? I haven't seen any information on that, and I think it's important that people should understand and know, and maybe you don't know the answer to this question, is this something with a term on it that would have to be renewed, or is it something that we're voting in a sales tax and it's going to be there forever and may possibly go up in the future?
Right. Thank you for the question. And it's what you put in your ballot language. Ours have had sunsets because our specific list of improvements needed X amount of money to fund. And we liked that tool in our measures. Los Angeles County, which, as the gentleman pointed out, that has so much work to do for so many mistakes of past generations, theirs is a permanent measure. The same accountability tools other than that, and a project list, but they have so much to do that they made it permanent by design, and their voters still passed it. So it's a good question to ask your local leaders, but for different regions, hours in each county are different durations of time, and in the case of LA, no time limit whatsoever. Thank you. And by the way, we didn't place our measures on the ballot through signature gathering or that type of direct democracy. So ours were also placed on the ballot by government agencies who have the authority to place things on the ballot. What we did was work with them in a thoughtful way to make sure the right priorities and projects and the appropriate funding source with accountability tools was part of the measure. So you're right, everyone will be a little different, but we do have that part in common as well. Sir, at the next microphone.
Good evening, Frank Jameson. I've been riding transit in Vancouver longer than anyone else here, right back to 1938. Robert's Rules of Order require that both sides be heard. What provision was made in San Francisco to provide media access to the no's? The reason I ask, we've had media coverage for the last 3 years promoting the Broadway subway and about a year and a half promoting light rail. The Vancouver Sun reports everybody who speaks in favor. Frequently, I have sent rebuttals of what those people said to the Sun, and nothing came out of it. The Courier is the same. They quoted a councillor, Vancouver City Councillor, as to what the trip time would be from Commercial Drive to Point Grey. I wrote to the columnist, to the editor, and to the city councillor, pointing out that he was low, that he had to add 50% to his trip time. I received no reply. There are 2 websites which are opposing this, plus the third one I just heard about tonight. How many people here can name the URL of a website which is opposing this?
Several hands.
I know 3 or 4. And anybody who's actually read to the bottom page of what I handed out this evening. So as a no campaigner, I'm resorting to standing out front of the door and handing out papers. And I do dispute your statement. We don't have enough transit that works. I ride it 300 days a year, and I think it does work.
Great. Frank, thank you. And again, this is what's great about a democracy, that we're all here, that you're on different sides of an issue, that you allow someone from out of the area share experiences and best practices. What I was referring to, oh, by the way, our measures have been in Santa Clara County, which is not San Francisco County. But in terms of earned media, a free press, running all sides of a story, on this trip, I've now been here for 26 hours. I read the Vancouver Sun stories last night and learned that of 22 mayors, 3 opposed it, 1 was absent, and there were quotes from the mayors who opposed it. And of the 19 mayors who were for it, that's a 6 1/3 to 1 ratio. There wasn't 6 1/3 to 1 positive quotes from the mayors who supported it to the ones who opposed it. And in this morning's story, it was probably 90% non-flattering. So from just a little bit of I've observed as the outsider in the room, I think there's been delightfully balanced coverage in a free society for smart people to make up their minds. Sir?
My name is Shiraz, and I am interested in the issue of urban farming in your, the farmers market and farms in the, people have started vertical farms and so on. So I wonder if in your program, did you have any plans for accommodating people who are interested in having their own private farm, small farm or backyard farming, and whether you had any idea or choice to make between planting trees without fruit or fruit trees along the road? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to admit you have me stumped. I'm from a region that's called Silicon Valley. It used to be called the Valley of Heart's Delight. It was one of the richest agricultural centers in California. But most of those farms have been replaced by innovation economy companies and the communities that surround them. In terms of urban farming, yes, there's some great sustainable farming companies in the valley that actually help people grow in their backyards, including my own, to grow some of their own fruits and vegetables. And I think it makes for a wonderful quality of life for those who want to have that. But forgive me, sir, agriculture is not my area of expertise. We're going to go to the next mic, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. My name is George Benson, and I'm a student of planning at the University of British Columbia.
Wonderful.
I think one of the things that's been really frustrating for a lot of young people in this campaign so far is that the voice of youth have been really underrepresented. I mean, you mentioned the young woman who's here, who many of these transportation investments could benefit one day. And I think a lot of the campaign thus far has really focused on, we're really overtaxed, we don't trust the transit agencies and so on. But the voices of the young people who in some sense, these investments are for, have been completely disregarded. And I think a lot of the young people, especially on the university campuses throughout the region, are really frustrated and are trying to move against that kind of voice. But I'm really interested, what kind of official structures, if you can speak to it, what kind of official structures did your campaign have to bring in students and to make them more aware? And how did you find that relationship working with students on the campaign?
George, you're obviously articulate and really inspired by this, so I hope you do engage and contact the folks who are running the campaign, of which I am not one. Obviously, I'll be flying out in the morning. But what we did with college students grows with every election as we learn. But what we have found is our college students, one, don't vote as often as they should. So register them to vote. And your BC Elections Department will help you understand how long people can register to vote for this plebiscite. Is it until March 16 when the ballots go out? Is it longer? Find that out. People who aren't registered to vote or aren't registered to vote here, if they're students from throughout Canada, encourage them to consider voting. Then, two, make sure they fill out those ballots. What we did was pretty in-depth, learning from 92, 96, 2000, and 2008. By 2008, we were so pleased with our low-cost, high-intensity, highly leveraged student campaign at all of our universities and two-year colleges, where pretty much every university and college had a sadly very underpaid campaign coordinator, lots of wonderful volunteers to not only communicate with the students, but most of our universities and colleges also have their own newspapers with their own editorial boards and their own news coverage reporters. And the goal was to also speak to students and through students through their media, by students. And it made the difference in our 2008 campaign. I didn't go into details here. I will now. Our 2008 campaign, we started 2 years in advance. These take a lot of time for us to thoughtfully put together. And the economy was red hot when we started. And then September of 2008 happened, and the globe fell into, to date, the deepest recession we've had, certainly in my lifetime. That's a hard time to pass a tax, isn't it? Because there are two basic questions that people ask on a tax measure. Can I afford it? That's number one. Can my family, can I afford it? And then, is what they want me to invest in worth it? Well, your plan looks pretty strong to me. I know our plans have been, but those are the two hurdles that people need to overcome. So September, late September of 2008, that can I afford it question died on us. It was very hard to raise the money to run the campaign. I ended up raising less than half of our budget. Again, to communicate with 1.9 million, not 39 million people. Our budget was to be 2.5 million, little over $1 per person who lives in our area, about $3 per likely voter. It's a pretty efficient campaign. I was only able to raise 1.2 million because the economy collapsed, trying to communicate with electorate that no longer felt they could afford it. We didn't poll above 64%. Have I shared with you the news? You're spoiled. You get to do this on a 50% plus one vote. We have to pass them by a 2/3 vote. 66.67% for a local specific transportation tax. 2/3. On election night, we lost. We had 65.56%. It took 4 weeks to count all the ballots, mainly from students, what are called provisional ballots, who didn't know where their polling places were. The students won the campaign for us. We went from a 65.56% loss to a 67.78% victory, winning by 0.11 of 1%, 2,250 votes out of nearly 500,000 votes cast. And it was the students who won it. So George, please engage.
I wonder if I could just make one more comment there. Because of the arrangement of the election date, starting on March 16th, one of the benefits to students is that many students who have just come to the region who are studying here will have been in British Columbia for 6 months.
Oh, good.
So they will be allowed and able to register to vote. So any of you who are students from outside of the region, I would encourage you to do so.
And please meet up with George afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank you, George. Yes, sir.
Hi, Carl. Thanks for. Thanks a lot for coming. My name is Paul LeBlanc. I own a small business in Vancouver.
Oh, good.
And as a small business owner, I really hate the provincial sales tax that this is all about. But I'm pretty pro-transit for selfish reasons also, because when the most recent Canada Line was built in Vancouver, it made my business a better place to work. So that's kind of what got me out here tonight and why I'm interested in it. My question is, if you were going to do another campaign tomorrow, you have your track record, the many times that you've had these taxes pass and these things built with those taxes, and it would make it, you have that to call back to next time. This is, as you've mentioned, the first time for Vancouver, the first time for Canada, but you were around the first time in your county as well,
yes,
as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any tips that you can think back, way back when, that you could share with us today of things that, of how you built trust without that track record? How we can build trust in this area for people who are maybe a little skeptical.
Sure, very fair point. And Paul, by the way, of our membership, even though it's many of the iconic brands known globally, 53% of our members are small businesses, whether they're innovation economy companies or other companies of clusters of the economy that are vital to a healthy place. It is a mix, so the small business perspective resonates. These are tough decisions for all of us to make. So often it comes down to, on balance, is this going to make our economy, our transportation system, our quality of life better? What we did in that first measure, we had some benefits. We had a strong economy. Not red hot, but strong. We had terrible traffic, so people were motivated, and we knew, going to an earlier point, state and federal government weren't riding in with barrels of cash. They weren't investing. They're even investing less in the United States and in California today, and we were going to do it ourselves or it wasn't going to happen. So we built in the accountability provisions that I think you've learned from and considered as you, as leaders here, have built your measure. Very similar provisions, and then kept people accountable. As the driving industries of our region, business leaders here as driving industries and industries in place in your region, this is where we keep local elected officials accountable. Honestly, that would be a lot harder if this were federal. It's harder to keep people in DC, here in your federal government, as accountable. Local elected leaders who you see in the grocery store and walk by on the street, and you have access easier to City Hall, it's a lot easier to keep people accountable. We did. I'm not sure they needed that. They were just as motivated to keep our word as we were, but it helps. And it worked. And again, you're a bigger region, population-wise, slightly. We're a slightly smaller base, but we made it work without accountability. How many cities are in the province, or in this part of the area? 22? Yeah, we're 15 cities in town, 1.9 million. You're 22 with 2.2 million. We have a lot more similarities than probably differences. We found we can keep accountability in check, and we've proven it over 3 decades. Yes, sir.
Hi there. My name's Silvio. I'm a transit user, and I'm sure you've seen there's a lot of opposition to this here. I mean, I'm sure there's opposition from people who drive and don't want to pay the transit tax, but there's a lot of opposition here because of affordability. And this increased tax will no doubt increase people's cost of living, especially low-income people in the region. You know, I mean, I support the referendum. I think it's necessary, and there's no turning back now from this question. But I was wondering if you could speak about if you have any experience or any knowledge about other types of referendums that have not involved a sales tax, but something that taxes, say, low-income people, people whose only choice is taking transit less. So if you could speak about something like gas taxes or you know, tolls, congestion pricing, if you have any knowledge of that, and if those have been successful in the past.
Thank you, Sylvia. Couple of thoughts. There's a cost to congestion, and I think it's a very real cost. The time spent in delay in terms of cost in additional fuel, cost in wasted time, cost in mental or physical health, cost in greenhouse gas emissions, those are all real costs that we pay. Costs in deplorable road conditions in our area also have a cost in the accelerated wear and tear on our vehicles. So there are huge costs to that. What you all have to balance, what we've had to balance in Silicon Valley, is that trade-off worth it? Is that per household for the typical family or a lower income family worth it? That's the decision that you're going to have to make, and you raise all the right questions. For me, with our measures, that answer has been yes. As you look at your plan and the benefits that you will receive by investing in your own future, you and your colleagues are going to need to make that decision. In terms of what type of a tax or a fee that we have moved forward with, that's been strictly practical and pragmatic. When we have done our measures, we do a lot of public opinion polling, because in a democracy it matters what our fellow private citizens think. We want to put together a good plan that's going to ease traffic, improve our quality of life, our air quality, and give us choices. And it also has to pass. And in our case, it has to pass by a 2/3, not a simple majority vote. So we'd better be hypersensitive to what people are willing to invest in. And for whatever reason, when we test in those polls, would you half-cent sales tax, and here's what it equates to. The equivalent in gas tax is X. Even when you tell them it's the equivalent, they don't want to pay the higher gas tax. When we say a congestion pricing fee, the equivalent would be Y. They don't want to pay that. For whatever reason, even the first campaign, when we were the first, as you are the first, for whatever reason, the sales tax funding mechanism was embraced when the equivalent types of taxes and fees to raise the same amount of revenue were not. So you go with what's practical as you try to build for your future. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Hello, sir.
Hi, my name is Farrell Siegel. For this evening, I represent about 13,000 co-op members at MODO. I work for the organization. But the questions I have to ask you, coming from your part of the world, is I'm sure they've introduced systems for transit to get priority on various routes, to have sort of separate lanes for transit. Some of these have been tested and never implemented here. We're also working with a government and private-public partnership in TransLink, where a number of measures have actually gone way past budget and way behind schedule. The latest Compass card is one example of that, where we've put turnstiles in, we've introduced police on to watch for fare evasion, etc. And we talked about, you know, a fair rate. And I'm just wondering how you controlled that in the Californian environment, where we don't seem to be able to have any, as a public participation here, any control over when this money actually gets collected. I think nobody's against collecting money for improved transit. Everybody would appreciate that. However, in the past record with fast ferries here, with bridge tolls, which were opposed, but the point is that there's no accountability here. And how did you overcome that accountability issue? Because you obviously did.
Thank you. And it's Farrell, right?
That's
Farrell.
right.
Thank you. You're each going to have to determine the delivery record of your transit providers and your transportation providers. That's obviously me coming from the outside, not something that I can speak with authority or knowledge on. Your other question, though, I will address, and that is, do our transit systems have dedicated lanes? Well, obviously our fixed rail transit, heavy or light, does. Our buses and express buses on many of our freeways, there is what we call high occupancy vehicle lanes, and they do. On a lot of our other roads, they don't have dedicated lanes for their use. And while one bus carrying 50 people is better than 50 cars carrying one, and there's that huge benefit, they're still stalled in that same traffic on our roads without improvements as the rest of us are. So it depends on which road system in our region that bus is traveling on. Yes, sir.
I think I'm after that fellow over there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm, well, I guess a transit rider in general. I'm with a group called Candidate Riders Alliance, and we align ourselves with the MVA as well as the Get On Board BC. For the main reason, the reason why we did that was that's because, well, for me to be here tonight, I have to book a week in advance, and I was in standby. Yet I made it tonight, but I was still late half an hour. I missed some of the good things that you have said. But my question is, in your experience and your campaigns in California, did you include people with disabilities in your campaigns? And how did it impact your campaign when a special service for people like us was included, if it was included? And would it be a negative, did it give a negative impact in your campaign?
Thank you. And if you couldn't hear, the question was around folks that are transit dependent or have disabilities that lead to that transit dependency, and have we included those in our measures? The answer is yes. In the 4 successful transportation sales tax measures that I've run, that has been included in all 4. That's just important to us, and we have included that in every measure. And if you were a half hour late, you have 2 choices. A lot of people here will say you didn't miss much, or you can wait for the major motion picture that's going to be coming out. The gentleman in the red jacket, and thank you for allowing this gentleman to speak first.
Yeah, this red jacket is proof I biked here today.
Ah, good man.
But
what kind of bike?
Norco,
okay.
Norco road bike. But I do take transit regularly as well. And my question, I guess, is about something that some hay has been made out of it over here, in that we are required to have a referendum, which is fairly risky and costly, over one piece of infrastructure worth billions of dollars, being the transit system. But there's no referendum being contemplated for a bridge being built to replace the George Massey Tunnel, which is about $3 billion there, or there's another highway interchange being built in North Vancouver for $250 million, I think it is. So in California, do you have that issue? Do you have to do referendums for highway projects as well? And if so, why? Or if not, if you need to make a ballot initiative to build those kinds of things as well, what's the logic behind that?
Well, first, it's always good to hear from a fellow cyclist. I commute most days to work at 17 miles each way each day, and it's the best part of the start and the end of my day. Traffic is so bad in Silicon Valley, too, that if I drove, it'd be 45 minutes. If I ride my bike, it's 55 minutes, and it's a lot more fun to ride my bike, so kudos to you. Second, the average commute in this region, as you know, is 6 kilometers or less, which is ideal for cyclists. So hopefully, as you continue to build more bike facilities, lanes, and paths, and I love your green lanes that are here, we're adopting those more and more in Silicon Valley, so we've learned from you, that more people will feel the freedom and the safety and have the network to get on their bikes. So kudos to you. In terms of what we fund in California, I think it was mentioned in the introduction. My day job is I'm CEO of the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and we don't solely work on transportation or the issues around housing and land use that I also mentioned. We work on, in order, because I love all my children equally, I'll say them alphabetically: education, energy, environment, federal issues, healthcare, housing, tax policy, transportation, and then we have a pretty robust foundation to help with just community needs for disadvantaged families. So we do a spectrum of work. The hat that may have been mentioned is I'm also chair for Governor Brown, and prior to that for Governor Schwarzenegger, on the 9-member California Transportation Commission. Check that. There's 11 members. 9 of us are gubernatorial appointees, 2 are appointees of the legislature. And we program and allocate $5 to $7 billion a year in transportation funding. But as the gentleman observed earlier, for a state of 39 million people, our need is about 40 billion a year. And so we're doing the best we can with a Band-Aid approach. That's why these local measures, county-wide in our counties, have grown so much, because no one's riding to our rescue. So the state is funding some improvements. They're not funding enough. And they're not always what we would pick as our own priorities as local communities or sub-regions. And so we're stepping forward. And that's why my hat is off to you. Many of you in this room are tired of what you're dealing with, and you're willing to move forward. That's what we've done. That's why I flew up to hopefully provide some encouragement, and earlier in the day, some best practices. Yeah, a lot of what's funded at the state level is just trying to maintain a battered road and transit system with the bandage approach to keep it from completely falling apart.
I guess to follow up slightly would be, is there another room somewhere else where somebody like you is talking about how to win a highway referendum? Is there a default assumption that the government will pay for road infrastructure, but you have to go for a referendum to get some new trains or new buses in California or here, and is that fair?
Right now, the emphasis in California and the commission that I chair and serve on is to barely maintain, and inadequately so, the crumbling conditions of our current transportation systems, including road and transit, and we barely do that. And we're almost building no new capacity through state funds because we don't have the funds. Yeah, kind of bleak. We can't end on that because I'd leave depressed and then I wouldn't come back. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm Stefan from SFU. Just a couple quick questions and then a comment. The first question is, what kind of voter turnout might we expect? What did you get in your different votes there? The second one is, if there was misinformation put out there, were you aggressive in going after it and getting accurate information? Because I've already seen misinformation here, and sometimes voters can believe it. And then just the last one, a comment. We had a table out at SFU last week, just trying to promote this referendum. Not many people stopped, and those who didn't know much about it, and most of them asked for more details. They said, how is this really going to benefit me? And I don't think the amount of detail that we've put out there up to now has been enough, and I'm just wondering, how much detail did you get into regarding the specific projects in terms of getting it in the newspapers and that type of thing?
Yeah. Stefan, 3 great questions. First, on voter turnout. Here locally, the people who are helping on the yes side should be able to have turnout models for you. Now, this is a referendum that doesn't fall on a normal election cycle or election day. However, people also have 75 days from the convenience of their own homes to fill out a ballot and mail it in. That's not my experience. I know our turnout models, whether it's a presidential general election, is different than a gubernatorial general election, which is different than a primary election, which is different than a special election. So you'll have people here who will help you know that. In terms of who we target likely voters. That's, if they're in the last 4 election cycles, who voted 3 out of 4 times or 4 out of 4 times. Those are your likely voters. And we target new voters because something motivated them to register, perhaps for the first time. So you kind of catch both ends of the spectrum there. That's as much as I'll go into strategy and tactics in a room with all kinds of positions on this. In terms of misinformation, you have to make a choice. You've got 55 days and a wake-up call to run a campaign, and then you have 75 days of additional campaigning for a mail-in ballot process that runs 10 weeks and 5 days. So there's resources in both talent and treasure. And if you were to have to hit every whack-a-mole that pops out of a hole, you're not going to be putting out your positive, proactive message, right? Because you're going to be distracted by reacting rather than being proactive. You have a great message. You have improvements that people in this region want and need. You're building for your future, for a stronger economy and a better quality of life and a better environment. Most of your election should be about your positive message, not what people are saying, whether it's fair critique, and nothing is ever perfect, or unfair critique, because it may not be based on 2 + 2 = 4, and factually it may be 2 + 2 = 80, and you're tempted to. So what do? I'm from Silicon Valley. Say it was Twitter, and someone attacks me or an initiative or a policy on Twitter. I don't look at the attack, I look at how many followers they have. If they have 3 followers, you don't need to respond. Don't waste your time. If they have 30,000 followers, you probably are going to need to respond and set the record straight. So perspective is important. Okay. Your third question was lack of awareness. You're right. That's a challenge and an opportunity. According to, again, the Vancouver Sun, and when I read it last night, only about 30% of folks know anything about this. That means you have a great opportunity to get out your positive message. So do it. And if people aren't stopping by your booth, have a more attractive booth. We give away chocolate. Right? What's going to get people to your booth? Or don't stand behind your booth. Step in front of folks in a polite way and provide them with the information they're going to need to help them make an informed decision. I will do whatever you would like me to do. Yes, sir.
Hi there. My name is Daniel. I like to take the transit and I like to cycle as much as I can. And I'm listening to what you're saying, and I hear a lot about the successes you've had with these campaigns and how you're seeing less and less sort of support from higher levels of government. And I'm wondering if this is our first campaign now for a transportation referendum, that we are to expect that our higher levels of government are going to stop supporting us on these sort of issues because of, well, now they've had one successful transportation referendum, we're just to throw all of these issues to referendums and avoid, taking money from the provincial and federal coffers to pay for things which normally they have been providing for. And so are we sending a message that this is now okay for our higher levels of government to start ignoring us because, well, we've got to pull up our bootstraps and do it ourselves?
Daniel, I love thoughtful macro issues and questions like that
that's
because it's one that we have posed on ourselves on occasion. So here's a couple of things. First, and I say this sadly, Washington, D.C., this is going to shock you, is a pretty dysfunctional place.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just transportation that the United States isn't investing in, locally, statewide, or as a nation. I don't think our measures matter a hoot to the decades-long disinvestment in transportation infrastructure that my country has decided to play. You can figure out if there are parallels there, Daniel, or not. But their dysfunction and their lack of investment not just in transportation, energy, schools, someone said healthcare. I mean, that list could go on and on, okay? So I wouldn't necessarily draw that link. The second thing that we did and that we've learned, and I mentioned it earlier, but I did it quickly, we have done our measures to fund what we thought was important. Those measures, in our experience, have attracted regional, state, and federal funds that otherwise we would never have received. They brought in those funds like a magnet because we didn't come to our region, our state, or to DC with our hand out. We walked out with money in our hands saying, we've invested, reward us. With the limited dollars you have, if we're willing to step forward and tax ourselves, we should be rewarded. And in California, it started a movement that we started called the Self-Help Counties Coalition, where all 21 of those 58 counties have banded together since we started these locally imposed transportation funding measures, where we have been able, through legislation, to be eligible for more state funds than we would have. That the federal government requires some level of a local match for many of the improvements, and we now have that local match. So it's been actually to our benefit, not to our detriment, in getting some of those limited state and federal dollars. The bigger issue that you've raised, and it's a good one, is, but shouldn't they be doing a lot more than what they, in too limited of a way, do? Yes, but I'm probably not going to change their minds on that. But I'm going to fix my community as best I can.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Daniel.
Good evening. Thanks for the presentation. My name is Eric Fox. I'm a student at the University of British Columbia as well. Cool. In addition to a package of projects, the Measure R and Measure J in Los Angeles also included this local return to municipalities, which is not going to be a component of this referendum, as I understand. Was that a component in your initiatives in Santa Clara County? And how important do you think that is in terms of especially bringing in voter support and or political support from especially outlying areas that aren't going to directly receive major projects?
And Eric, every electorate is a little different, though we have usually much more in common than we think. But one of the key things we have in common is almost every voter, especially on a measure where they're asked to help fund, ask the WIIFM question, what's in it for me? So of our 5 measures, one of the 5, and the one we're planning for 2016, will almost assuredly have it. Our roads are in such deplorable condition that we want to have funds, as we've done in one of them, for pavement maintenance and rehab. And for those, based on population and road miles, there is a return to source provision, again, with a lot of accountability. Because our concern would be City X says, thanks for that extra money. Now out of our budget, we're just going to fund it X less. So our provision to protect ourselves on that, Eric, is they have to be able to show what their average investment in their streets and roads were dating back the last 3 years. And they have to maintain that level of their own investment so that we are supplementing, not supplanting what they've done, so that it actually improves their roads. And we reward good behavior. I'm going to geek speak completely now. The PCI, the Pavement Condition Index, needs to be at least 75%. But we have some of our 15 cities and towns that have really invested in their infrastructure. They have been good stewards of the limited dollars they have, and they have 80, 85, 90, 95% good or better pavement condition index on their roads. If they're already performing that well, they can take our additional funds and use it for any transportation improvement within their jurisdiction. So each community is different. We have deplorable road conditions. LA's are really bad too. That's why they have their return to source. I don't know if they have the safety that we have on supplementing rather than supplanting. I don't know if they reward good behavior by allowing it for other uses if people are, have really good conditions. Those are the localized decisions that each measure has to consider. I hope that helped.
Yep, thanks.
Sure. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hi, Carl. My name is David Lee. I'm with the development planner with the City of Vancouver. First of all, I just wanted to thank you for your time. I too have a 3-year-old daughter, and I missed putting her to bed tonight, so thank you for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So the question is as a development planner, I was just curious if there's any strategies that you worked with the city on from a planning end and number two, if you did work on strategies with development planners, what did you find to be the most successful?
And every region is different. Of our 5 campaigns, I've only run the last 4. The first one, I was tangentially involved, but I was in a different occupation at the time, and I supported the measure and really tangentially helped, but I was not leading it or co-leading it or a part of the epicenter of that campaign. For the campaigns I've run, a big part of it is depending on transportation professionals, which it sounds like you have done here in terms of the package of improvements. But we, as private citizens, would ask and impose upon the time of our local planners and transportation professionals in our 15 cities and towns, and our county, and all the transit providers from throughout the region. And we would bring them to a safe space to talk as professionals and answer the questions of what are the individual projects that are worthy of considering, that have the best return on investment, and then collectively how do those projects work together for the good of the grid, the good of the systems, not just system, but systems of mode choices. They have a huge say in what we do because we depend upon professionals to do their jobs well in a safe space where they're not thinking parochially. They bring their parochial knowledge to regional challenges. And they have helped us immensely with the 96, 2000, and 2008 measures of what we actually placed on the ballot, while concurrently in a democracy testing what they told us to make sure that that's what voters were willing to invest in with our hard-earned tax dollars. We've been fortunate. They've helped us put together good plans. Hopefully we've run good campaigns explaining those plans, and we've delivered on those improvements. So we use you and your colleagues a lot.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi. Whoa. Sorry, guys. It's a very effective microphone. My name is Curtis. I'm a big transit user, even bigger cyclist, so thank you for sharing your knowledge tonight. I'm always polishing my pitch for friends and family about infrastructure, and I was curious, since you've obviously done this a lot, when you're the first and out of the region stats don't work. I've been to Copenhagen. I've seen the bike lanes work. Their light transit system is amazing, but people haven't been, don't believe me, and say that won't work here. It's a culture thing. It's an age thing. It's because they have the euro. It's because their humidity is different, blah, blah, blah. When outside region stats don't work, and you seem like a stats man, which is awesome. I love numbers. I'm German. What do you use to sell it to opponents? How do you make the argument for them in a way they'll believe for your specific region? That's my question.
Yeah. Sure. First, you're not going to convince everyone.
For sure. People on the fence.
Yeah. In my faith tradition, there's a scripture that says, "Come, let us reason together." And so, to the best that you can, provide people who are earnestly trying to make a very important decision with the information they need to make that decision. Stay factual. You're only as good as your word. Provide data-driven information. And when you don't know something, say you don't know something and try to refer them to a factual, credible, ethical source that will. That's part of the key. And know that in a democracy, I've never seen a 100% vote yet. It's happened in some past Russian elections in another era, but not in Canada and certainly not in the United States. So that's okay too. My wife doesn't agree with me all the time either, and when we don't, she's right, by the way. So know that, but try to get the data that you need. And you're right, there are some regions in the world, you mentioned cycling, it's amazing. When we went to Amsterdam on business, my wife and I, a few years ago, the mode share they have on cycling without great weather conditions and not even really dedicated bike lanes, but just a culture that we cycle and that when we're driving we respect cyclists is truly amazing. We have a long way to go. It's part of the beauty of the world. We can learn from each other. You know, my goal tonight was to give Charlotte the last question. That was the 9-year-old here with her family. But I think she was the only one who showed really good judgment, and I think she left early. Is Charlotte still here? Charlotte, I hope you're put to bed then. Thank you all for coming out and joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure.